Hi, and welcome to episode 4 of Book Club. Today I am going to read a story out of the book Fearless Fairy Tales, written by Konnie Huq and James Kay, illustrated by Rikin Parekh. Fearless Fairy Tales. Fearless Fairy Tales. Sleeping Brainy. Oona was a very brainy princess. She could count to 17 million and do her 48 times table backwards. She could do it forward too, mind you, but she found that a little too easy. She knew Einstein's theory of relativity inside out and was working on a new and improved version. To say Oona was quite clever was an understatement, like saying Rapunzel's hair was quite long. The truth is, Oona was a flipping genius. Oona already knew exactly what she wanted to be when she grew up, and it most certainly was not a princess. She couldn't imagine who in their right mind would want to spend their days tiara shopping or leafing through Vanity Fairy Tale magazine or cutting ribbons and declaring buildings open. What a waste of time, not to mention ribbon. No, thank you very much, she thought. Being a princess sounds absolutely rubbish. When I grow up, I'm going to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Oona already had much better ideas than the current Chancellor, Neville Tightwad, who kept getting his sums wrong, leaving the country with a massive deficit. 20 take away 2 does not equal 90 trillion and 3, sighed Oona, as Mr. Tightwad announced the figures in his latest budget. But her father, the king, wouldn't hear a word of it. Being Chancellor of the Exchequer is far too difficult a job for a girl, he snapped. Princesses can't solve equations or do algebra. Tell you what, here's a grand. Go and buy yourself a sparkling new tiara. One day, while the king was busy posing for his official royal portrait, Oona sneaked into his counting house and counted all of his money. She spent all day doing the sums to calculate exactly how much cash was needed to pay the country's bills. She also calculated that it took her 3 quills, 11 ink pots, and 322 sheets of paper to do these sums, but that's beside the point. Just as she was on the brink of saving the entire kingdom £350 million a week, a voice boomed out from behind her. Oona, dear, does my bottom look big in this? The king was standing in the hallway, clutching a rather unflattering portrait under his arm. When he saw Oona's sums spread out all over the floor, his face turned so purple that Oona was worried the portrait artist would have to completely redo the painting. Enough is enough, young lady, boomed the beetroot-faced king. This is the final straw. I'm hiring you a royal tutor. You are going to learn all the things that princesses ought to learn, like waving nicely and smiling and sewing and receiving floral bouquets and cutting ribbons and walking elegantly on 10-inch high heels. Not doing complex calculations. But that's not fair, cried Oona, tears stinging her eyes. And I'm banning counting throughout the whole kingdom just to make a point, declared the king. It will be high treason, punishable by 300 years of prison. So Miss Phyllis Snoot-Faced was hired after she spotted a job advertisement for the most boring princessing tutor in the land. Every morning, afternoon, and night, Miss Snootfest would force Una to do silly exercises like walking on cobbles in glass slippers with the entire Encyclopedia Britannica balance on her head to maintain perfect princess posture. Una didn't want to carry the books on her head. She wanted to read them, even though she had already read every single volume 20 times and was currently in the middle of writing an early version of Wikipedia. Una's despair had almost reached boiling point when she conjured up a cunning plan from thin air, the way geniuses generally do. She remembered the bedtime story the king had once told her about a princess who pricked her finger on a spinning wheel and fell asleep for 100 years. She decided she would pretend to do the exact same thing during her own sewing lesson. That way, Una would be able to sneak into the counting house at night while everyone else was asleep and do as many sums as she liked without being sentenced to 300 years in prison. Una was delighted with her cunning plan and set about putting it into action by pinching a bottle of fake blood from the royal jester's quarters and practicing her pretend snoring. Una was all set for the big day when troubling news reached the palace. Nobody in the kingdom was able to get to sleep, no matter how hard they tried. Lying down didn't work. Closing their eyes didn't work. Comfy pillows didn't make the slightest bit of difference. Everybody in the kingdom was wandering around in their pajamas, yawning and beggy-eyed. Even Phyllis Snootfest couldn't doze off, and she usually bored herself to sleep. The king was so tired that he didn't have the energy to fathom an answer to such a complex problem. He decided to sleep on it, but of course he couldn't. Una, being a genius, took all of 3 minutes to work out what was going on. Well, 30 seconds actually, but it took 2 minutes to sneak the bottle of fake blood back to the jester's quarters, and half a minute to get the king's attention. "Daddy, I know the answer!" The king rolled his beggy eyes. "Don't be ridiculous, Una. Why would a little girl know the answer to anything? Don't bother me again until I've sorted out this blasted situation," he yelled through a yawn. A day went by and another, until eventually no one in an entire kingdom had slept for 100 days. Una was extremely tired too. She was even more tired than the time a pea rolled under her extra thick, duck feather-lined memory foam mattress, causing her to toss and turn all night long. She was even more tired than the time she woke up from a nightmare in which she'd kissed her pet frog Ribbit, and to her absolute horror he turned into a prince. But most of all, she was tired of the king not listening to her. Things in the kingdom had gone from terrible to terrible-er. The sleep-deprived Chancellor, Neville Tightwad, was making more mistakes than ever, and the kingdom was quickly running out of cash. The king knew it was time to sort out this insomnia-inducing situation once and for all, but maybe after he'd had a little nap. "Oh dear," said the king when he remembered that he couldn't nap. "I can't even manage one wink, never mind 40 of the blighters." The king summoned the royal astronomer to look into the stars to see if he could find an answer, but all he could find was stars. If only he'd spotted a shooting star, he could have made a wish that people would sleep again. But alas, he did not. Useless. The king then summoned the chief royal scientist to do an experiment, and it worked! The king jumped for joy. The chief royal scientist jumped for joy. Everyone jumped for joy, and then they realized that the experiment had nothing to do with sleeping, and just proved that copper wire burns with a bright blue-green flame. Useless. So the king summoned the royal jester, who told a joke. "What do you call an Italian with a rubber toe?" the jester asked. "Roberto," he cried in an Italian accent. "Roberto, Roberto, ha 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 ha." Nobody laughed. except the jester. Perhaps they were too tired, or perhaps it was just a bad joke. Either way, useless. The king's despair had now reached boiling point. Exhausted, a laughing-stock and broken man, the king summoned Una to ask for her help. "You see, Daddy, it's quite simple," said Una faster than the speed of light. "When you banned counting, nobody could count sheep to get to sleep, so that's why everyone is so tired." Una tried very hard not to look too pleased with herself, but she couldn't help but smile. "Oh," said the king, "that really was quite simple." So at last, the problem was solved. The king lifted the counting ban, the nation took a very long nap, and Una was voted #1 top princess of all time by Vanity Fairy Tale magazine. All the eligible suitors in the kingdom queued up to meet her, but she didn't have time for suitors. She had too much studying to do. Plus, Ribbit wanted to play leapfrog. The king apologized to his daughter. "I've been a bad king and a bad father. From now on, you can use the counting house whenever you need peace and quiet to do your sums." He then ordered the chief royal scientist to invent the calculator to help Neville Tightwad with his sums. He ordered the royal cook to prepare a celebratory feast, including a generous serving of humble pie for His Majesty. And finally, he ordered the royal jester to stop telling bad jokes. The celebrations continued till the stars came out, and at last everyone fell asleep. Finally! Years later, when Una was a grown-up, she became the first ever woman to be appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer. On day 1 in the job, Una decreed that maths and science would both be compulsory subjects in the national curriculum for all primary school children. Una became the country's most successful chancellor in history, turning Neville Tightwad's mess into a prospering economy. Una also went to improve upon the chief royal scientist's calculator by inventing the computer, and then the internet, and then her favorite website, Wikipedia, which you may remember she had started writing when she was just a young princess. Sighed Una as she finally put her feet up, all in a good 9,618 days' work. The end. If you are new to my channel, the channel's name is Konnie Huq. If you like my videos, click like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Look out for more videos. See you next time. Bye.